Beautiful packed room of housing activists. The best place to be on a first really cold winter night. So, as all of you know, I don't have to tell you, but we're entering some dark days ahead. At the federal level, along with healthcare, immigrant rights, and our civil liberties, housing is going to be under attack. Donald Trump and Jared Kushner are landlords in their hearts, if they have hearts. They're evil, they're greedy, and they've proven at every turn that they don't respect the rights of tenants. And they don't believe that New York City should be home to people who can't afford their gold leaf luxury. But here, right in this room, we have more history, more knowledge, and more fight in us than they could ever dream of or hope that their money could buy.
There you go.
As many of you know, Met Council on Housing was founded in 1959. Our founders, Jane Wood and Jane Benedict, among them were tenant leaders who followed in the steps of the labor and tenant movement of the 1930s. There are a lot of comparisons being made now between our country and the 1930s. As someone who grew up in a secular Jewish, socialist, communist family, this comparison really terrifies me. But when I think about where I would want to be and who I would want to be with as we face unspeakable horrors, I realize that it is with all of you in this room. The people in this room have experienced fighting back and winning against some of the very people who are about to take power. We need every single one of you now more than ever, and I know that you need Met Council. We are going to have to bring new people in, lots of new people, and strengthen the leadership of those among us who will be targeted and will be most vulnerable. We're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to go back to the tactics we used before. In preparing for this event, I got to talk to a lot of people who worked with Jane Benedict and Jane Wood, and it's amazing to me the types of tactics that were possible just a couple decades ago. I talked to Tito Delgado, who worked for Met Council under Jane Benedict and worked very closely with Jane Wood, and he told me a story about squatting a building in Chelsea where the landlord had cut off services and was trying to pay thugs in the neighborhood to come in and break the boiler. And Jane Wood came up with the idea of having a 24-hour watch on the building, and she gave everybody a wooden baseball bat. Yeah. He also told me one of his best memories was being carried out of a rent guidelines board hearing by the police because there was a riot. The tenants were rioting in the rent guidelines board hearing. I mean, we are going to have to go back to these types of tactics, things that people, standing up to power very directly, confrontationally. We can't afford not to at this time in our country and in our city. You're here. Amen. We're building the Council on Housing to be a force for social change, for social justice. We will be a haven for immigrant tenants and LGBTQI tenants. We will be a home, and we will fight to save your home. And I don't just mean your rent-stabilized home, but your city and your country. Met Council is your home, your family, and I am honored to be a part of it and be in the midst of tonight's honorees, standing shoulder to shoulder on the Three Janes. I'm honored to be a part of it and be in the midst of tonight's honorees who stand on the shoulders of the Three Janes and the thousands of men and women who built the housing movement. Before I continue, I just want to recognize that Met Council operates on a very small budget and with a very small staff. This is not our entire office. Our office is just a tiny section in the back with the partitions covering it because we make a lot of noise on the hotline. But we do, oftentimes I tell people we're only 3 staff and they're amazed because they get our newspaper and they call our hotline. We are run by the passion of our volunteers and the passion of our staff. I want to recognize Nova Lucero and Andrea Shapiro. Nova is our social work interns this semester who helped put this whole event together. Please raise your hands. Where's Brianna? And our hotline is run by tenants who oftentimes got involved, like Ariel, because they called the hotline themselves, and they want to give back, and that's what our model is. It's about mutual aid. If you are helped, then you have to give back, and that's what I heard a lot of people saying that Jane Wood and Jane Benedict talked about. You know, they like strong-armed people. If we're going to help you and we're going to organize your building, you better help the next tenant. And that's how we have to build this movement. We have to be in solidarity with one another. Otherwise, no one's going to be there to fight for us. So thank you for coming out tonight, and I look forward to fighting alongside with you.
Good evening. So I'll be brief. I was asked to tell a couple of jokes, and unfortunately, my best material was just elected president of the United States. And there's not much funny about that. Maybe his hair. Sam, did you bring that wig?
No. We got it here.
I don't know if this program is going to be broadcast on Met Council's radio show on WBAI. Has a notebook, but there is a sign in the studio with 7 words that you were never allowed to say under any circumstances until one morning we read them on the cover of the New York Times in an article about Donald Trump and his disgusting attitude towards women. But tonight, Pussy grabs back as we're going to recognize 3 of the women who were champions of the housing movement and some of the men and women who have followed in their footsteps. Bob Dylan could not be here tonight. To read a couple lines from his poem about the rent stabilization law called Everything is Broken. Broken pipes, broken tools, there's people bending broken rules. Ain't no use jiving, ain't no use joking, everything is broken. The question is, what are we going to do about it when all the avenues seem to be closed? The state government controls our New York City's housing laws, and is still controlled by a corrupt and dysfunctional government, bought and paid for with real estate money that they got out of our rent dollars. And the federal government offers no help or relief in the foreseeable future. So obviously we have to think and act locally, but at another level, when all the avenues are closed, we have to take to the streets. So say with me, when I say whose streets, you say our streets. Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose homes?
Our homes.
All right.
A reminder that it may be time to start flexing our riot muscles once again. I don't know, maybe some of them are a little atrophy. We haven't had to go to the riot gym lately. We're like riot push-ups and our riot practice rounds, right? Our riot laddies. But it's coming, and this is the room to be in it for. So we're going to start the Jane Awards, and you may be thinking, the Janes, how is it possible that there are 3 Janes that we have to name these 3 awards from? And I assure you, if you don't already know, the stories are truly amazing. And so to give us a little bit about the Janes, we have Roberta Gold. We don't have Roberta Gold, all right. You'll never know. then, you know, like how many know who Oscar is anyway, right? Right? Oscar, no, who's Emmy, whatever. About the Janes as you are, because we're going to begin talking about them, talking about the awards. And so the first Jane, the Jane Wood Award, presented to Graham Sorello, will be presented by Norma Aviles from the Chelsea Coalition on Housing, Sabrina Morrissey, a longtime friend of Jane Wood, and Nova Lucero, one of the organizers here at the Met Council.
It's not going to be Sabrina.
It's not going to be Sabrina. It's surprises here, everyone. Twists and turns every step of the way. Tim Wood, her son, an even more intimate portrait. Or not, as you prefer. All right, come on up, you guys. Or whomever's coming up.
Norma and Tim.
Sabrina,
Norma.
were you going to say a few words?
No, you go ahead.
There you go.
I can't do this.
You gotta turn to get it right now.
Hold it very close.
Is the tribute gonna talk right now?
I'm actually Jane's stepson. I lived with her for about 8 years, and then went to college, and then I got married, and but that's in the remarks I'm going to read to you now. Most of the people who knew Jane in the years past knew her through her work as a tenants' rights activist during the last few decades of her long life. Those later decades of her life were spent in focused and tireless efforts to help people in her community to preserve and improve their homes. But she has been and done many other things along the way to becoming the person many of you knew. Jane seldom talked about her early life. I think it was because she wanted people in the community. She wanted people in the community to know her by what she did and said, and not by where she came from. I think she very much wanted to create her own identity. As some of you may know by now, Jane was born in 1907 in St. Louis, Missouri, to a life of wealth and privilege. She was the only child of loving parents and grew up in a very large house, really huge, surrounded by servants. Her father was a successful banker, and her mother was a descendant of a Mayflower family. She attended all the best private schools, girls' schools, where she not only developed her mind, but also her character and physical abilities. The girls at those schools were encouraged to excel in sports, and Jane became skilled in tennis, skiing, ice skating, swimming, and horseback riding. She attended Smith College, possibly taking her horse with her, and graduated in 1929. A few years later, her father died of pneumonia. In those days, a new wonder drug called penicillin was showing signs of great potential, but had not come into general use. And although her family had access to this treatment, she told me that the decision was made not to try it. His death was very hard on her. So it was in this period, during the depths of the Great Depression, that Jane set out to make her way in the world. Early in life, she had developed an independent, even rebellious nature. So when she moved to New York as a young woman, she gravitated towards the kind of left-wing artists and activists that were then concentrated in Greenwich Village. In moving away from the sheltered and privileged life she had known and settling in New York in the 1930s, Jane began to see the world and its problems in a clear and personal way. In New York, Jane supported herself with a variety of jobs. As a salesgirl at Woolworths for a while, as a waitress. She said she was terrible. And she even had a modeling gig. I have pictures. She also began on her work as a printer. But all the while, she stayed active in community work, union organizing, and politics. Jane worked very hard on FDR's last presidential election and was rewarded with an invitation from the White House to attend his inauguration. Jane met Bob Wood shortly after the war, and they were married in 1947. My parents' divorce settlement allowed me plenty of visits with them, and when my mother moved out of New York, I moved in with Bob and Jane. During those years, Bob and Jane worked together on tenants and housing issues. Jane still had her printing shop, and Bob's cigar import business started to grow. In those years, Jane became a devoted mother and dedicated homemaker, along with everything else. I left for college in 1961, and Bob died suddenly from a heart attack in '63. So again, Jane was devastated by a tragic and untimely death. I married Ruth, in 1965, and so did not live with Jane after that. But all of these things are mainly a recitation of events. Let me tell you a little more of what Jane was like as a person, from my point of view. Jane always loved animals, especially dogs, and in the 50s had a pair of Boston Bull Terriers named Popeye and Maggie. They weren't spayed, and every so often there would be another litter of 6 or 7 puppies in her tiny apartment. There would always be a runt in the group who couldn't get to Maggie at feeding time. So, equipped with an eyedropper, Jane always made sure that the smallest member of the litter got its share of nourishment. None went hungry. All of them made it. Years later, she adopted an abandoned stray that she found in the neighborhood and called him Spotty. He was an adult pointer mix, completely untrained and virtually wild. Those traits made her love him all the more. It's unfortunate that she never had natural children of her own because she had a powerful maternal instinct and would have loved them dearly. And although she was always loving and supportive of me, she made sure that I always got right up when I fell, and faced with adversity, she told me that it was not enough just to endure, but that one must also fight back. Jane had tremendous willpower and self-discipline. As late as 1991, when she was about 84, she would still swim many laps in a Jersey lake, typically going back and forth with her beautiful crawl stroke for over an hour to emerge from the water at last, totally spent. Later, you may remember, just walking became an arduous and painful exercise, but with her 2 canes, she soldiered on.